The machine took down the man. That's the line I'd like to start this video with because, to me, in many ways, that is what just happened in the NFL. 2 Sundays ago, to be specific, Super Bowl Sunday, the machine, known as the 2024-2025 Philadelphia Eagles, took down the man known as Patrick Mahomes, the greatest player currently playing the sport of American football, and already one of the greatest quarterbacks we have ever seen play the sport. That machine took down that man, and it's been a long time coming. That's how I want to talk about this game. That is how I want to frame this game, and before we go further, I will acknowledge that that is reductive, right? The Chiefs, as far as they are concerned, did not lose to a machine 2 Sundays ago. They lost to a football team, like all other football teams. And the Eagles, as far as they are concerned, well, they didn't just beat a man. They did not just beat one singular player. That's not very cool. That's not very impressive. No, they took down the entire Kansas City Chiefs, the entire Chiefs dynasty. This game was not a battle between 2 different entities. It was not a battle between 2 different forces, 2 different symbols. No, this game, like all other Super Bowls that have come before this, like all other football games that have come before this, was a battle between 2 teams. T-E-A-M teams. Nothing more, nothing less. It is silly and, depending on who does it and how, probably bad faith to frame it any other way. Bad faith to frame any football game any other way. That being said, though, I'm gonna. And I guess that means it's in your hands to decide whether or not my framing is bad faith. So, if you're on board to hear me out, let's get to it, because I really do think this angle is the most fun one to take, and that's what this video is all about. I choose to view this Super Bowl, Super Bowl 59, as the Super Bowl in which, after years of battling, the machine finally took down the man. And that word finally, I think that's the word that can really usher in the rest of this conversation. I say finally because, to me, this is something that hasn't just emerged in the NFL in recent years. This battle between machine and man, it's been kind of the story of the last decade in a number of ways. Sure, Patrick Mahomes, the man, Patrick Mahomes, has lost in the Super Bowl before, and sure, other quarterbacks have won Super Bowls in the time that Patrick Mahomes has been in the NFL, but the nature of these Super Bowl wins have been, well, not machine-like wins, these non-Patrick Mahomes wins. They've still been wins for the man, at least to me. And this allows me to really talk about my philosophy here, the 2 types of football teams as I see it that have won championships in the past decade or so. As you have probably gathered, my framing here is either man-based teams, man-driven teams, or machine teams, machine-like teams. To me, the easy framing here, seeing as quarterback is the most valuable position in football, is that the man teams are teams that are quarterback-centric, heliocentric, man over machine. It's not that there is no machine here, but in the same way that in real life maybe an elite driver is the reason that a race is won and not just the vehicle, these football teams, the way that they are looked at is that without their driver, without their quarterback, they were good, but maybe they weren't the best. The other type of team then, the inverse of this, the machine teams, would be the teams where the driver is good, but maybe not the reason for victory in a race, and instead it is the machine, the sum, the group effort, the collective operation, the vehicle that allows for victory. Those are the 2 types of teams to me. There are the quarterback-centric teams and the machine-centric teams, man and machine. And in recent years, if you buy into this framing, all of the Super Bowl winners have been man wins. They've been driver wins. They have been heliocentric, quarterback-centric wins for football teams one way or another. Walk with me. We've got Patrick Mahomes. He's Patrick Mahomes, right? He won an MVP before he ever won a Super Bowl. Generally, if your quarterback wins an MVP or is first-team All-Pro or is widely regarded as a top 5 guy in the sport before he gets anything done in the playoffs, that sets you up, that sets your team up for this quarterback-centric, heliocentric framing going forward, right? If your quarterback is top 5, your team should be top 5, and you should have a realistic shot at winning the Super Bowl most years. Again, maybe you don't believe this, but I think generally this is how we choose to view teams with these caliber of quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes, he's won 3 Super Bowls in the past half-decade. Those were all quarterback-centric, heliocentric wins in one way or another. That is what I would say. Maybe you disagree, but I think that is what most people would say. Outside of Patrick Mahomes, outside of that man, though, the man that I started this video with, well, we've had some other wins for the man. All of the wins have been for the man, again, like I said. So we've got Matthew Stafford. He was traded for. He was a former first overall pick. He was wasting away in Detroit. We all knew he was a pretty good quarterback, but we knew that he kind of lacked the machine, lacked the vehicle to really get anything done. Sean McVay, a cultivator of one of the best, most effective, most damaging machines in football over the last half-decade or so again, well, He abandons his initial driver, Jared Goff, the first driver of the vehicle, because he does not think he's getting the job done. He trades for an elite driver in Matthew Stafford, and that driver immediately leads Sean McVay to a Super Bowl. To me, that felt like a win for the man, a reminder that no matter how good your machine is, you oftentimes need that man to push you over the edge. That is what happened when the Rams won the Super Bowl. After that, if we're working backwards, the most recent Super Bowl win for a non-Mahomes, non-Stafford figure was, well, Tom Brady. Again, that's pretty similar to what happened with Stafford in LA. Tom Brady, he leaves the Patriots, he goes to a Buccaneers team that has a good roster, but it's not quite a roster capable of winning a Super Bowl. It's definitely not a vehicle capable of winning a Super Bowl without a better driver. Tom Brady comes in, he's that new driver. The Bucs win a Super Bowl immediately. Even if you think that team was stacked, even if you think that vehicle was amazing, the general framing in the discourse, once again, it's man-centric, right? It's look at Tom Brady, look what Tom Brady did. Now, before Tampa Bay, our most recent Super Bowl winning team, most recent Super Bowl winning quarterback was, again, Tom Brady. And the funny thing about Tom Brady on the Patriots is that I think we're all aware those wins were neither man nor machine. In the Super Bowl, the Patriots defense allows 3 points to Sean McVay and his machine. Tom Brady wasn't out there playing defense, right? It would be absurd, ridiculous to only credit him for that win. But at the same time, again, if we're just talking about the discourse here, the framing of the discourse, it was two things. It was, one, this is now the greatest dynasty of all time. Bill Belichick is probably the greatest coach of all time. He's probably the greatest GM of all time. But also, Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback of all time. And we can't forget that the week before this, he did put up 30-some points on Patrick Mahomes in the AFC Championship game. These were absolutely Tom Brady wins as much as they were Bill Belichick wins, if not more depending on how you view quarterback importance. My point being, I think if I had to pick between these being machine wins or man wins, we would probably all lean man because by this point we had accepted Tom Brady was the greatest quarterback to ever play football. Again, if you had to pick. So that's back to 2018 now, right? It is 2025 now. That's 7 consecutive years of wins where, in one way or another, we're giving credit to the man before we talk about the machine. We're talking about quarterbacks. We understand that quarterback is the most important position in football, and without these guys playing at a certain level, you might not win the Super Bowl. Now, 2017, that's the last time we really have a different perspective on this. That is the last time that, to me, the machine won. That was, of course, the year of Nick Foles and the Philadelphia Eagles. And even though Nick Foles was the man in that Super Bowl win, he was Super Bowl MVP, he outduels Tom Brady, he throws for 400-some yards, I think we would all recognize, or can recognize now with hindsight, that the machine was the reason for that Eagles win. We know that since that year, Nick Foles didn't exactly go on to have the most amazing NFL career, and we know that before that season, he wasn't exactly the best. And we know that during that very season, there was a time where he was a backup to Carson Wentz until Wentz goes down with an injury. I think that that's more than enough grounds to qualify this as a win for the machine and not the man. So Howie Roseman scores a point for the machine that season, but it still is weird. Machine wins do feel different. When the man wins a Super Bowl in the NFL, at least in recent years, and we look forward and try to project the future, we normally operate with the assumption that as long as that man is around and playing healthy football and playing the type of football that we know they're capable of, they will consistently contend. Just look at Patrick Mahomes and how consistently he has contended in his years since his first Chiefs Super Bowl. Look at Matthew Stafford with the Rams and how the Rams were just giving the Eagles a run for their money this season. Look at Tom Brady and the fact that even after 2018, when it looks like maybe he's run out of gas in the tank, he goes to Tampa, he wins a Super Bowl with Tampa, and then we talk about Tampa that same way, and the next year he gives the Rams a run for their money on their path to a Super Bowl. Generally, when the man wins a Super Bowl, we talk about the future in a bit of a promising way, in a bit of an excited way. I'm not going to say that we were all criticizing Philly after they won their Super Bowl in 2017, after their machine win, but I will say that we weren't really talking about Philly's future in the same excited tone. I don't really think people saw Nick Foles as a future top 5 quarterback and as a man who would ensure that the Eagles consistently contended. I think we all recognized that the future of the team, it hinged a bit more on the machine and how rusted it would get, or not rusted, how much more it would improve, or whether or not it would decay and age. So the machine wins in 2017, but we're not exactly talking about the future, which now allows me to raise the question that kind of sparked this video: When is the last time a machine won a Super Bowl and we talked about that machine excitedly? We talked about it as if it had a future, as if it may be the start of a dynasty, the same way that we kind of view these man wins oftentimes as the birth or extension of a dynasty. Well, if we continue going back, in 2016 the Patriots win another Super Bowl. And I think we can all agree that the Patriots, if anything, are just a good reminder to us that football is all about marrying man and machine. It's about the fact that you can't consistently win without excelling in both categories, in both areas, in both criteria, whatever. That being said, though, anytime you win a Super Bowl with a quarterback who plays like a top 3 player in the sport, I think we're going to have to give a bit more credit to the man than the machine. And in this case, in this season, Tom Brady absolutely played at that level. So again, in the discourse, I think we're all led to view this as more of a man win than anything else. And that's fine by me. So 2016, that's another win for the man if you had to pick. In 2015, though, Peyton Manning wins a Super Bowl. And the funny thing about that season is that even though we all agree Peyton Manning is one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history, this win was absolutely a win for the machine. At least to me. This win was all about defense. Peyton Manning had a worse passer rating than Brock Osweiler on that season. That was his backup. I mean, it was pretty clear that this win was bigger than just Manning. And I think by definition, that means that this was a win for the machine. But again, like I said, in relation to that 2017 win for the Eagles, the machine wasn't exactly talked about as something that was going to continue to keep winning in the future. Yes, the Broncos won that Super Bowl, but Manning quite literally retired after that game. The future for the Broncos was uncertain. This wasn't a machine win where we were talking about the machine in the same way that we talk about the man. The machine wins felt different. 2014, that's another win for the Patriots. That was the birth of the second half of their dynasty. That was, again, a bit more of a win for man than machine if you had to pick. So then we are led to 2013. The Legion of Boom Seattle Seahawks taking down the man, Peyton Manning, in the Super Bowl. That, to me, is the last time in NFL history, 11 years ago, the last time that a team won a Super Bowl where the vehicle was prioritized as a point of interest over the quarterback, over the man, and where our conversations were future-centric without necessarily being quarterback-centric. Again, at least to me. And that second half of these criteria is again what I find most interesting. The fact that we could have future-centric discussions about this machine. We didn't really do that with Peyton Manning. We didn't really do that with Nick Foles and the Eagles. We did it back then with Russell Wilson and the Seahawks, and we're doing it now with Jalen Hurts and the Eagles, and I think there's a lot of parallels between the two. And if you buy then that both of these teams, the current Eagles and the 2013 Seahawks, fit into this machine label, then you'd agree with me that this is really significant. It has been a really long time since this has happened. But maybe you do disagree with the label for this Eagles team, or maybe you disagree with that label for that Seahawks team. Maybe you say, well, Jalen Hurts, you're misrepresenting him, he's better than you're giving him credit for, and you're missing the part of the discourse where we talk about Jalen Hurts. Maybe I missed the part where we talked about Russell Wilson in the mainstream. I would just break it down in this very simple way. As it pertains to the Eagles, they have a top 3 offensive line in football this season. They have a top 3 running back. They have a top 3 receiving core. They have a top 5 tight end, to me. Maybe you disagree with that one. And they have the number 1 ranked defense in football definitively. Those old Seahawks teams, they had the best defense in football far and away. They had Marshawn Lynch. They had solid receiving cores. I think these Eagles teams, this current Eagles team is better, but I do think that we all talked about those Seahawks teams as a machine, and I do think that because of how I just laid out the Eagles, we're not just going to talk about the man. We're going to recognize that this Eagles team is really deep, really talented, that the vehicle is excellent. Now, I will acknowledge, though, that this phrasing, it clearly downplays Jalen Hurts in the equation a little bit. Just calling these machine wins and not calling them football team wins, that alone downplays the quarterback in any equation. Jalen Hurts had an excellent postseason. All I am saying here, though, is that you have to acknowledge that the machine was good enough that it was worth talking about first. And that is rare. It was rare that it happened for the Seahawks, and it's rare that it's happening now. But in both cases, I mean, Russell Wilson went on to be a great quarterback in the NFL for quite some time. He's still playing. I'm not saying Jalen Hurts can't do that too. This is not putting a ceiling on Hurts. It is just laying out how this football team that currently won a Super Bowl is comprised. So if I've sold you then on the Eagles being a machine, on them fitting into this machine label, at the very least just more than the man label, and if I've sold you on the fact that the NFL has not seen this in a while, especially not in this way where we're talking about futures, then I now want to talk about why this is also significant, the gravity of it, what it all means, and how it projects going forward, what it makes me wonder about the future, with Seattle being our most recent point of reference. If that sounds good to you, let's do that. Let's get into the real history here, the significance, the gravity. And I think to do that, we have to first start with the failures. The old machine models, the previous versions of the machine, the Terminators before the Terminator. There have been a lot of excellent machines in recent NFL history. Teams, rosters, where the vehicle has elevated the quarterback, where the winning was clearly done primarily because of the vehicle and not because of the quarterback. The thing about these old machines, though, is that they never quite got the job done, at least not the way that the Eagles have. Some of those old machines, well, I think we have to start with the machine master in recent NFL history. To me, that is Kyle Shanahan. Say what you want about Brock Purdy, but the man has made Super Bowls with not just Brock Purdy, but also Jimmy Garoppolo. That, to me, is one of the easiest ways to identify a machine. Has this vehicle made multiple Super Bowls, multiple big games with different pilots, with different drivers? The 49ers are the most clear and obvious example of that, with Kyle Shanahan, a master play caller, and a pretty great front office there that has done a great job drafting talent into the building. Another machine builder, another man who attempted to earn points for the machine in this battle between man and, was Sean McVay. Jared Goff and the Rams, I talked about them already. They got close, they couldn't quite go the distance, and the reason that they were ultimately limited, it ultimately did come down to Jared Goff. I think Goff has clearly evolved to become a great quarterback in the NFL now, but if you look back then, you can find old quotes from Patriots players before that Super Bowl talking about how Goff was the point of interest and the weakness in that team, the chink in the armor, all of that. And if you delve into why Sean McVay ultimately traded Goff away, it was because he felt that Goff limited their offense, that he had to do a bit too much to appease Goff, to help Jared Goff, and he wanted a better driver, plain and simple. So again, Sean McVay, much like Kyle Shanahan, someone who comes from the same coaching tree, he was another coach who attempted to build an excellent vehicle, a vehicle that could go the distance, and he just didn't quite make it, at least not until he got a better driver. Another example, arguably, of a machine attempting to take down the man. It's not the best example ever, but the 2016 Falcons. We all can agree that Matt Ryan is a great quarterback. Some might even view him as a Hall of Famer. At his peak, he was a top 5 quarterback in the sport. You can debate how long that peak lasted for, but I think one thing we can all agree on is that 2016 season, the time that the Falcons made a Super Bowl and lost to Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, well, Matt Ryan was the man. He was the MVP. He was the best quarterback in football that season in some ways, but he did have Kyle Shanahan design him a master machine. That was kind of the first time that we realized that Kyle Shanahan, he might be better at this than we're giving him credit for. Maybe we should give him a head coaching opportunity and see what he can make of it. All of that. All I'm saying is that Matt Ryan, he was never that good before Kyle Shanahan, and he was not that good anytime after. So maybe Kyle Shanahan and the machine he built deserves more credit than we're giving it for that Falcons run. Editor Anthony here. Sometimes editor notes are necessary. I don't really like how I phrased that. I think that if Matt Ryan had won that Super Bowl that year, we would probably talk about it the same way that we have spoken about this Matt Stafford Super Bowl recently. I don't think that would have been a full win purely for the machine that Ryan season, and I'm not saying that Ryan was bad before or after Kyle Shanahan. All I am saying is that he was clearly elevated to the highest peak of his career when he was with that master offensive mind. It wouldn't have been a win for the machine. It would have been a win of marrying man and machine. Like I said, it would have been like Stafford and McVay. But I do think that they're worth bringing up in all of this. It was one of the first attempts of the Shanahan tree to take down someone like Tom Brady, to take down a man. I'm not going to say that was a full machine attempt in the same way that maybe Shanahan with Purdy or Shanahan with Garoppolo was, or McVay with Goff, but it was closer than I think people give it credit for. So that's 3 different franchises with different attempts at variations of these machines, right? We've got the Niners, we've got the Rams, we've got the Falcons briefly, if you want to count that one. And I think we could also throw in the 2021 Eagles into here. That was an elite defense. They broke a sack record that season, and it was a pretty great offense. It was a top 3 line, again, and a top 3 receiving core. Say what you want about Jalen Hurts. He had an MVP caliber season, but the Eagles were looted of both coordinators as soon as that season ended, and they failed to replicate that same success the next year, which again kind of implies that maybe it was a bit more machine than just man. Now, whether or not you believe that all of these teams fit into the same machine category, I think there's one thing that we can all recognize for sure, and that is that none of these teams won the Super Bowl. None of them actually got it done. And the guys that they kept falling to, well, those were teams with the man. Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady again, Patrick Mahomes again. Even in seasons where these teams didn't make the Super Bowl, like, say, Jimmy Garoppolo's final year with the 49ers, his final full season, they lose in the conference championship to Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan's rival. except Sean McVay has a man in a way that the 49ers do not. In fact, prior to this season, prior to 2024-2025, we've only had 3 different quarterbacks win Super Bowls since 2018, and 5 since 2014. So in a full decade, that's only 2 seasons where a machine wins, and in one of those 2 years, the guy piloting it, well, he's still Peyton Manning. He's still one of the greats. In some ways, then, it's kind of felt like the machine has been a dying breed in the past decade. If you don't have a quarterback that, in some way, shape, or form, is a top 5 guy, either by smarts or by talent at the position, then you're just not going to get the job done. You're not going to go the distance. That's how it's kind of felt. Case in point, just look at quarterback draft positions. Prior to the 2020s, I believe through all of NFL history, there were only 3 times ever where quarterbacks were taken 1, 2, and 3 in the NFL draft. That's already happened multiple times in the 2020s. You can look at quarterback contracts, too. Quarterbacks are now being paid more than ever, and they're being paid more of the salary cap than ever. Teams recognize that without a quarterback, without a good enough guy at that spot, you're just not going to be able to consistently compete. It's felt like, again, the machine, it's just never going to be enough. That's how teams have kind of viewed this. You can also just look at how NFL Discourse has evolved as well. It feels like we talk about quarterback rankings more than ever. It feels like we're talking about quarterbacks more than we're talking about teams. I mean, even this video, that's feeding into that. It has definitely felt, though, like quarterback comes first and then everything else is just everything else. That's how recent football has felt in a lot of ways, at least to me, and I hope that by kind of outlining and underlining the failures of the machines prior to this, that maybe you'll agree with that too. And I think one of the biggest common denominators of all here is something I haven't even touched on yet, and it's the fact that in comparison to quarterbacks and their rise, well, running backs have been falling. The plight of the running back has been a serious problem in the NFL recently. Take a look at this chart, I think I'm showing it over my shoulder right now, of Super Bowl winning teams and the amount of their salary cap that was dedicated to their running backs. It wasn't that much in recent years because in recent years, it's never really been about the running backs. It's been about 1, your quarterback, your man, and 2, your play caller. The rest, it just kind of feels like it falls into place. Again, there have been a lot of good machines in this time, like the ones that I just pointed out, but if none of them were actually winning Super Bowls, were teams going to continue to follow their model? That was kind of the question. It's a quarterback era, we've been told. It's the quarterback-centric era. Quarterbacks are not taken in the second round anymore. Quarterbacks are not slept on anymore. This past draft even, we saw 6 quarterbacks taken in round 1. That has never happened. Your best shot at contention, we have all been led to believe, is to have a clear top guy in the sport. An MVP candidate year after year from a young age. You have to cast your net wide in hopes of finding this guy. You have to hope you hit, and if you do think you've hit, you need to lock them down immediately. That is what we have all been told. This has been the consensus, and I mean, it's really not wrong. It's fairly objective by now to say that consistency at the quarterback position is the most common denominator for winning in football. Consistent elite play, that is. But we have had some guys try to fight that, because after all, there are only so many elite quarterbacks in the sport at a given time. What are the rest of the teams supposed to do? Well, they're supposed to innovate. They're supposed to find answers. They're supposed to build up their vehicles. And some guys have consistently built excellent vehicles in spite of whoever their quarterback may be. We've got Kyle Shanahan. Again, he's the most obvious example. Success with both Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant. We've got Dan Campbell reviving Jared Goff in Detroit. We've got Todd Bowles and the success he's seen with Baker Mayfield, who was abandoned by the Browns. We've got Matt LaFleur and the success that he's seen post Aaron Rodgers. In some way, shape, or form, these guys have all fought back either through success with multiple quarterbacks or success with overlooked quarterbacks. Quarterbacks that were gambled on in the past, quarterbacks who didn't pay off at first, and quarterbacks who now have reminded us that just because they're not elite doesn't mean they can't be good. Play calling and moneyballing is absolutely an alternative path to relevance, to consistent playoff appearances, to having inspired fan bases, and to having a bright future. These teams are the lovable underdogs in some ways. They promote the idea that football is, in fact, a team sport. That no matter how aggressively, how loudly you as a fan are told that you can only win with a top 5 guy, no matter how aggressively and loudly their coaching staff, their front office is told this, they do not care. They believe there are other paths to success. They pursue these paths, and they have seen some success. They take risks on running backs. They invest in their offensive lines. They build up their leaders while embracing the other 52 on their roster. It is a no one-man overall team-building philosophy, and it's incredibly admirable. And yet, that guy named Patrick keeps breaking them. And before him, it was Tom Brady and Bill Belichick who broke them. And again, it's not just Patrick Mahomes who breaks them. It's Steve Spagnuolo as well, it's Andy Reid as well, it's Travis Kelce as well. But it's what Patrick Mahomes stands for. What Tom Brady stands for, what Matt Stafford stands for. The idea that without a top 5 quarterback, your vehicle, it doesn't matter. That is what they stand for. Sean McVay, he gave up. He was broken. He went and traded for Matthew Stafford. Kyle Shanahan, I'm not going to forget the Trey Lance trade anytime soon. I hope you don't. That draft pick, that trade, it was directly the result of Josh Allen walking down the 49ers the previous season. 3 first-round picks for Lance. That was not for no reason. The Lions and the Bucks, 2 of the more recent iterations of these vehicles, 2 of the more recent attempts at building the Terminator, well, they both just got sent home in the playoffs by the same guy, by the same top 3 pick at quarterback, Jaden Daniels, by the next great quarterback prospect. Plain and simple, it is just a lot more challenging to maintain your machine than it is to maintain a single man. Behind guys like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, a lot can change and you'll still be all right. They ensure a certain level of stability and elite play in your offense that really isn't dependent on anything else. That same level of comfort and those same expectations, well, they're not quite the case when you're working with more parts. It started to feel as though you need an outlandish amount of talent, youth, and injury luck, I'm looking at you Lions, to overcome these current NFL trends, to rewrite history, to rewrite the narrative. You're probably gonna need resilience too, because even if you make it to the big game, Patrick Mahomes, he's not exactly the one that you want to test in close games. He might not go down the first time. Can you claw your way back? Can you give it another shot? Does anyone have what it takes? These were the stakes. This is what it felt like to me, at least. Would the pendulum swing back or not? Would the machine ever finally take down the man? Or was this the era of man now? Was this the era of quarterbacks? That, to me, was the question heading into this NFL season, the same way that it was the question heading into the last NFL season, and the one before that. And this time, it happened. The machine actually did it. And the gravity of that, I hope now, is not lost on you. The machine won, and it didn't just win, it dominated. Which leads us to the Super Bowl itself. I find the Super Bowl fascinating because, to me, it really epitomizes these ideas of man and machine, and it draws them out to their most extreme. It asks questions like, at what point is the machine so dominant that it deserves to win regardless of who the man is? And on the other side, it asks the question, just how man-centric can a team be before it is too man-centric, before it is too man-centric for its own good? Now, maybe you don't like that phrasing because it makes it sound like Patrick Mahomes, the man, deserves all of the credit when his team wins and none of the blame when his team loses. And I am about to talk about why the Chiefs demanded too much from Patrick Mahomes this season. But I will make something clear. Mahomes played a terrible game in this Super Bowl. He was, in large part, the reason that the Chiefs lost. But simultaneously, this Chiefs team also was simply too dependent on Mahomes for their own good. And I'm going to try to convince you of that as well. This dominant win for the machine was just as much a loss for the man as it was a win for the machine. I think those two things can coexist. And we'll start with the Chiefs of it all before getting to the Eagles. So starting with the Chiefs, the man who lost, the man who was stretched too thin. I think if I had to boil it down, I would boil it down to this. In a year where most of the top teams in football drifted away from quarterback-centric play in one way, shape, or form, this was the most Patrick Mahomes Chiefs team we have ever seen. It was the most Mahomes team yet. Why do I say that? Well, it's a number of things, but I'll start with this. Ball control. The key to success in the NFL this season and in recent seasons has been ball control. If you look at the trend over recent NFL history, there are fewer possessions per game now as offenses find themselves more efficient and as defenses in turn improve to match their efficiency. There are fewer explosive plays, which means that the best offenses are the ones that can, 1, find explosives, but 2, see sustained success without explosives by, say, running the football, by marching down the field consistently, avoiding turnovers, avoiding sacks, avoiding those negatives, and thumping away at defenses until they can finally break them with an occasional explosive. The number of average possessions per game in the NFL this season is basically the lowest number we've ever seen, and we've been tracking this stuff since 1996. It is for sure the lowest we've seen in the past decade. And it is not a coincidence, then, that almost every elite team in football this year was a ball control team, and in turn, an elite rushing offense. Almost every elite team in football this season was top 10 in rushing attempts. You look at the Eagles, you look at the Lions, you look at the Commanders, you look at the Ravens, you look at the Bills. Guys, they could all run the football. There's one name I'm forgetting though, right? The Chiefs. The Chiefs, well, they weren't good at running the football. They were 15th in the NFL in rushing EPA per play, and they were definitely not top 10 in attempts. In a season where ball control has been more important than ever, the Chiefs, well, they weren't doing the thing you associate with ball control. They weren't running the football effectively. But they made the Super Bowl, so what were they doing? Well, again, I said they're too Mahomes-centric. That was their problem this season. And now I can kind of underline that. So, in every metric outside of rushing attempts, the Chiefs were one of the best ball control offenses in football. In terms of drive length, they were bottom 3 in drives per game, all right? They were first in plays per drive, so they ran a lot of plays. They controlled the ball really effectively. They were third in total first downs gained. They were 7th in scoring drive percentage, and they were 7th fewest in the NFL in tackles per game for no gain or loss as of mid-December. All right, so these numbers changed a little bit, but for the majority of the season, the Chiefs were a ball control offense in every sense. They were the best third and fourth down team by EPA per play in football. Patrick Mahomes on third and fourth down and long alone has more than double the EPA, expected points added, of any other quarterback in football this season. The Chiefs were second to last in explosive plays behind the Las Vegas Raiders, and the Chiefs were top 2 with the Philadelphia Eagles in 10-plus play drives this season. Kansas City also had a terrible explosive play differential. All of these stats, I hope, are coming together to paint a picture for you of an offense that was not that great on first down, not that great on second down, pretty good on third down, pretty good on fourth down, not great on any one given drive in terms of gathering explosives, but pretty consistent when it comes to getting just enough to ultimately score, and scoring just enough to ultimately win a football game. It was a lot of just enough. Now, I said their explosive play differential was terrible too. That's interesting because, one, that means that their offense wasn't really generating explosives. If they were scoring, it was gradual. They were marching down the field. They were simply not messing up, right, as opposed to really excelling. But that also means that their defense gave up a decent amount of explosives, which allows me to talk about their defense. Normally, if a team like the Chiefs is going to go 15-2 in a season and make the Super Bowl, and their offense is going to be relatively mediocre, a ball control team, sure, but not exactly a high-flying, high-scoring, explosive play-centric team, well, you'd assume that their defense then must have been elite. The Kansas City Chiefs did not have an elite defense, not by any means. The defense was 49th percentile in points per drive allowed. They were 15th in EPA per play. They were 13th in success rate. They weren't really top 10 in any major metric, not in the regular season and definitely not in the playoffs. Both of their units were mediocre. Sure, the team was 15-2 on the year, but if we're being real, if you're just looking at every game they played, they were all close games. Kansas City set a record for one-score wins in a season. The amount of games that they won by 8 points or fewer. They set a record for it. Starting in 2023 and extending through 2024, Kansas City has won 17 consecutive one-score games. The Chiefs, they scored 30-plus points 0 times in the entirety of the regular season. Only one other team qualified for that. That was the Las Vegas Raiders, all right? This was a 15-2 football team that was not particularly amazing on either side of the football. What were they great at? Well, situational football. I don't want to hear the ref stuff. If you look at the Chiefs games, and if you look at their coaches, and if you look at their quarterback, I think it's a lot easier to explain the Chiefs' success at the end of close games as something that is situational excellence, as discipline, as execution, as all of the little things that make for great football teams. Not luck, not refs. That is an unbalanced, unguided perspective to me. Maybe you disagree. I do not think the refs were the reasons that the Chiefs went 15-2. I think that the Chiefs being great situationally was the reason. I think that Patrick Mahomes stepping up when they needed him to step up was the reason for a lot of their success. I think that everybody playing just good enough for Mahomes to move the needle the rest of the way, that was the reason that the Chiefs often won their football games. Again, I point you to how few negative plays they had, to how long their drives were, to how ineffective they were rushing the football, and to how deadly they were on third and fourth down. To me, all of that paints a picture of a team that was really dependent on their quarterback, really dependent on their coaching staff, and not particularly excellent when it comes to the actual players who are on the field. So again, in a season dominated by run-heavy, ball-control offenses, the Kansas City Chiefs were the only football team in the Final Four that saw success via an alternative method, via their quarterback alone, not via their rushing attack, not via their defense, not via their offensive line. The Chiefs were doing it differently. They've always kind of done things differently, but this was really different. Is Patrick Mahomes really this special, or was this a warning sign? That was our question heading to the Super Bowl. I, like most others, kind of opted for the Patrick Mahomes is special route. I mean, we know the guy's an amazing talent, and we knew that this football team played their best football when they needed to step up. Like, say, the Bills game, the first time all year that Kansas City scored more than 30. It was in their most important game of the season. It would be silly to not give Patrick Mahomes the credit he deserves, and to say that maybe this team was set up to get blown out in the Super Bowl. How far can one man take you was the question, and the answer, based on the past decade of football, based on the career of Patrick Mahomes so far, well, it's the sky's the limit. That's what we all thought. Nobody really said that Patrick Mahomes was going to get blown out. Nobody could confidently do that because all we have known is the Chiefs winning games that they aren't supposed to win. All we have known is the story of the NFL being a story of quarterback play and of marrying your quarterback and your offensive mind. This has been recent history. This has been what we have lived. And then the Eagles changed it. The machine won. Patrick Mahomes could only take this team so far, and the game was not close. So now let's talk about the Eagles' dominance. I'd put it like this to start. The Chiefs' vehicle got exposed. Their vehicle was severely outraced. In the Super Bowl, the Eagles did not blitz once. That has happened in 4 games since the Next Gen Stats era began back in 2014. That's about 2,800 football games played. We have seen a team not blitz another team in a football game 4 times, all right? This was one of those games, and this was a Super Bowl. In spite of not blitzing, the Eagles had a 50% pressure rate on Patrick Mahomes. That speaks to the strength of their D-line in relation to the Chiefs' offensive line. A 50% pressure rate, that's a lot. If you look at, say, the Bucs Super Bowl, where Patrick Mahomes was harassed behind that poor offensive line and by that Todd Bowles defense, well, the Bucs had a 50-some% pressure rate, but they blitzed 13% of the time. Again, a low number, that's barely anything. But this Eagles performance was even more ludicrous in some ways. Philly ran cover 4 on 60% of their dropbacks in this game, all right? That is a top 5 mark since 2018. All of the football games played since 2018, a top 5 number. Think about that. So Philly did 2 different things that you almost never see in the NFL. They barely blitzed, and they played a really predictable coverage style. They were so good that it did not matter, though. They were so fundamental, so sound, so well-oiled, such a dominant machine that it did not matter. Patrick Mahomes was flustered. We have never really seen him play like this. This is about as easy of an outlier to identify as there has ever been for any player in any sport, ever. A one-of-a-kind game from him in a bad way, and from Philly in an amazing way. The Chiefs' weapons were locked down. Mahomes was pressured on every other play. He threw 2 bad picks early, 2 incredibly uncharacteristic picks, 2 picks that he could not throw if he wanted this Chiefs offense to excel in the way that they had excelled all season. Through ball control, through slow and steady gains, it just wasn't happening in this game. And whether you want to blame Mahomes or credit Philly, that's up to you, but I know where I lean. I'm going to lean Philly. Kansas City's offense was Patrick Mahomes. Philly took away the rest, and it immediately became apparent that that was not going to be enough to win this football game, and the Chiefs had no plan B. That was it. That was all she wrote. Additionally, Philly was dominant on offense in this game as well. Jalen Hurts set the record for the best EPA of any quarterback in a Super Bowl in NFL history. He is now definitively, I think we can all say, a playoff riser. No matter how much credit we want to give the machine, there's no denying he is cool, he is clutch, he is calm, he is collected. He sets a Super Bowl record for most rushing yards by a quarterback in the big game. Saquon Barkley was not even needed in this one. The offense had some short fields. Jalen Hurts took some well-timed shots, and he made some excellent pre-snap adjustments in this game. This machine needed a sound driver. A driver who knew when to accelerate, who knew when to hit the gas, and who would guide it ever so carefully. That is exactly what Jalen Hurts was in this game, and now he's a Super Bowl champion. Now, on the season for Philadelphia, this was a culmination of a year's worth of dominance. This team went 16-1 after their bye. This team trailed for under 8 minutes in the entire postseason. This team trailed by 10 points or more in 2 games all season. One of those was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game, where they were missing 3 of their star players. The other was the Baltimore Ravens game. They recovered that deficit by the second quarter. This was a team that avoided situational football in large part because they were too good to play it. They were almost always winning. And when they were winning, they could just defer to Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley finishes with the best running back season ever in terms of total yardage gained. This was the #1 defense in the NFL in terms of explosive plays. And after the bye, they were first in EPA per play, first in success rate, first in dropback EPA, first in dropback success rate, first in rush EPA, and first in rushing success rate. I believe the term for this, when I'm listing off stats like this, is juggernaut. Is it not? Philly was good in years past. They had made a Super Bowl 2 years prior. They had different coordinators then, and they had different coordinators their previous season as well. The 2023 Eagles season was a bit of a disaster down the stretch. 1-6. It seemed like the team needed some guidance. It seemed like the team needed to recalibrate. That's exactly what they did. They recalibrated. They didn't have enough explosives in 2023, so they went and got Saquon Barkley. They didn't have good play callers, so they got some new ones. Their defense looked old. It was top 5 in terms of snap-weighted age in 2023. It was bottom 5 this year. Everything was fixed about this team. You can credit the coaches, you can credit the owners, you can credit the players themselves for the reflection that they did. All of it culminated with this Super Bowl win. That was the final result. Philly deserved this win. They dominated the game. Patrick Mahomes, the man, never really had much of a chance. And that makes sense because this is what the perfect machine looks like to this point in NFL history. This is the Terminator that we've been waiting for, the Terminator that took down the man. This machine reminded us that no man, no football player is above their team. On paper, what advantage did Kansas City have outside of Mahomes? Nothing, really. Their defense wasn't better. Their offense wasn't better. Maybe their coaching staff is better. Maybe their team is better in terms of situational football. But nobody, like I said before, confidently guessed a blowout in this game. But that's exactly what happened. And that tells us something. This was a win for football. It was a win for perspective, a reminder that we never know what's going to happen, and that no matter how many times one player or one team does something consistently, everybody has a breaking point. Everybody is capable of reminding us that they're only human. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is immune to weakness. Nobody is above the game. The machine reminded us that we build for a reason, that there is more than one way to have a bright future in the sport of football, that there is more than one way to reach the mountaintop in football. After close to a decade of waiting, we finally got this. So what does it all mean? What does this masterclass in recalibration tell us about machine building, about what machines need to look like in the future, and about what the man can do in response? Well, I think we need to look at Howie Roseman, right? The master recalibrator here, in some ways Philly's X factor, the man who has guided this team to not 1, not 2, but 3 different Super Bowl appearances in the past decade. I think it's pretty clear, pretty easy to argue that Roseman is the best pure GM we have ever seen in the salary cap era. When you think about all of the other great GMs in the past 30 years of the NFL, most of them have had a level of continuity at head coach or at quarterback that Roseman has not. He has made 3 different Super Bowls, like I said. He has won 2 different Super Bowls, and he has done so with 2 different groups of quarterbacks, 2 different head coaches, and 3 different groups of coordinators. The only common denominators here for Roseman are Lane Johnson, Jeff Stoutland, and Brandon Graham. Now, Jeff Stoutland, I think that's the first thing I want to talk about. And if Philly is going to see sustained success in the future and potential additional Super Bowl appearances, I think it comes down to Stoutland, and it comes down to their offensive line. And it comes down to the idea that football is a game that starts in the trenches. There's a great story from 2017 when the Eagles won their first Super Bowl. Kevin Clark, the reporter formerly of The Ringer, went to go write a piece about this Eagles team. He showed up to their facility, and his angle that he had predetermined was going to be all about analytics, about their 4th down aggression, about the data science going into Philly and how they approached football that year. And apparently when he entered that building, he was laughed at because in the staff's mind, it wasn't that complicated. It was as simple as Philly invested in line better than other teams. That's why they won. That's what they said back in 2017. Clark learned his lesson, and I think we've all learned that lesson since, with Philly's 2 additional Super Bowl appearances. You can start with the line investment when talking about what makes Philly and what makes Roseman so great. You can also talk about how Roseman snags players who fall in the NFL draft. He has done this forever. Most recently, we've seen this with Cooper DeJean and Quinion Mitchell, 2 studs already on this Eagles defense, 2 guys who were rookies this season. You can see it with guys like Jalen Carter, a second-year player who was already one of the best defensive linemen in football, who fell for his own reasons in the draft. You can look at guys like Jason Kelsey, a 6th-round lineman. You can look at guys like Jalen Hurts, a 2nd-round quarterback draft pick. Howie Roseman has his eyes and ears open. Funny enough, he's gotten the reputation of being a social media GM by some. He goes for big-name players a lot of the times, players that fans like, players that the media likes. And the thing is, I actually do think that this label is fair in some ways. Howie does take chances on guys because of their consensus positions a lot of the times. The term draft faller is only a term that we can use when we know where a guy's consensus spot was supposed to be. There is something that's called the consensus media big board that comes out every draft season. Howie often drafts guys who have fallen relative to their consensus position. And more often than not, these have been good moves. These have been good decisions. Because the media oftentimes knows what they're talking about, at least when you put them all together and create that sort of collective consciousness. Funny enough, last draft season, Daniel Jeremiah, a top draft analyst, said that Howie Roseman actually texted him and asked him to stop talking about a certain player, a guy whom he did not want the media to speak of. That's the type of guy that Roseman is. He is incredibly aware. Like I said, he has his eyes and ears open. On top of knowing when players should be picked up, knowing when players should be added to his machine, Roseman also does a good job of identifying when pieces should be cemented, glued into the machine, kept around for a while. If you look at this chart, Howie Roseman locks down talent at pretty much a higher rate than any other GM currently in football. The Eagles have more pre-planned money going out to guys currently on the roster than any other team in football. And the thing about the Eagles relative to other teams is that they do this while preserving their draft picks, unlike, say, the Cleveland Browns. Philly recognizes that no matter how many pieces you have locked down, at some point they're going to get old. At some point they're going to rust and they're going to age, and you're going to need to replace them, which means you have to excel at the draft. Howie, as a result of also paying out players when they need to be paid, does a great job of taking his medicine when guys begin to age. If you look at how the Eagles managed their money from 2017 to 2020, it was exactly that. A team that understood where they were in their timeline overall, relative to their books, and a team that understood what moves they needed to make in relation to that timeline. Moves like, say, drafting a new quarterback, just in case. We see how that panned out. On the subject of taking a guy like Jalen Hurts, Howie Roseman is also great at stealing away undervalued talent from other football teams. Jimmy Johnson once famously told Bill Belichick, "You only really have to worry about 8 teams in football in a given season. The other 24, they get out of your way." I think that Roseman currently does a better job than any other GM in football at taking advantage of the other 24. A.J. Brown, Saquon Barkley, Mekhi Becton, even. Zach Bond, even. Although that was more of a Vic Fangio move than anything else. But again, who hired Vic Fangio? And who let Vic Fangio go? And of course, finally, I already talked about Jeff Stoutland, but Howie Roseman does a fantastic job of listening to members of his staff, of taking their advice on personnel. He does a great job of letting guys like Jeff Stoutland identify offensive line talent that is not being properly recognized. Guys like Jordan Mailata, another key piece to the Eagles' recent success. Roseman knows who to listen to, he knows where to look, he knows how to listen, and all of this is what has created the greatest GM resume of the salary cap era. Roseman also has incredibly high job security. We can't not acknowledge that. Kalen Collar recently wrote a piece for ESPN about agencies, about GMs, and about coach hirings. And in the piece, an anonymous coach shouted out Eagles ownership as having the clearest vision of any ownership that they have spoken to across the National Football League, of actually understanding what they want to accomplish and how they want to go about it. I think that has to be recognized as well. You need continuity. You need like-mindedness between ownership and your general manager, or else your football team simply won't excel, because this is a business after all. The Eagles, plain and simple then, to me, are open-minded, and they know how to recalibrate better than most. They failed once in the Hurts-Sirianni era, but they persisted. They identified the assets most valuable to their machine, they remapped their course, and they recognized their window before striking. This is, then, from the on-field product all the way up to the front office into ownership, a machine-like approach to football. Recalibrating, reallocating, updating, remapping. It's been masterful. I would put this creation up against anybody. This organization, this football team, this year, I would put them up against any machine and any man that has come before. This is peak football to me in just about every way, and that's why I've appreciated this Eagles season so much. From beginning to end, I will say that oftentimes I was nervous during the year, but now with the gift of hindsight and with the season concluded, we can confidently say that this is one of the more perfect seasons we have ever seen from any football team in all of NFL history. And I really think that should be appreciated, and I am trying to appreciate it. So to conclude, has Howie truly cracked the code? Is this something new for the sport? Is this the beginning? Is the machine now going to reign supreme? Or is a tightrope still being walked? Is maintenance still up to question for this machine, like all machines that have come before this, as opposed to teams that build around the man? I could tell you what I think deep down, but the truth is, we don't really know until next season happens. We don't know the moves Howie will make. We don't know how his contracts will age. We don't know how closely he will be copied by others now, others who are learning from his machine. And we don't know about the injuries. That's a big part. We know that football is a game of chance, a game of luck, and a game of a lot of misfortune. And like I said, we just don't know. We don't know how Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, etc. on the other side will grow and adjust in comparison as well. The man-centric teams, they're not going to give up because of this, just like how all of the machine-centric teams in years prior to this just kept knocking until this Eagles team broke through the door. But we do know that this win and everything that it stands for matters. That maintenance matters, that recalibration matters, that avoiding rust, accounting for new obstacles, and shedding dead weight at the right moments matters. Forgive my overlapping figurative language, but I hope you see what I'm saying. Ultimately, in some ways, all this Eagles team, this Eagles machine did in relation to other machines that have come before them is win one additional football game. Does that one win really warrant this framing? This monologue, this video, this elaborate conversation? You could say that it doesn't. That this team win is the exact same as all other team wins. That there are no men, that there are no machines, and that all we have are plain old football games. You wouldn't really be wrong, but I also wouldn't find you that much fun to talk to, and conversation, that's what I'm all about here. I love this framing, and I think this framing, at least to me, really sums up recent NFL history in a way that I find fascinating. History is written by the victors, and for a while now, at least to me, those victors have had quite a bit in common. But now the Eagles have the pen, and I think we're all interested to see what they write next. That'll do it for this video. Thank you for listening to my deluded ramblings about men and machines in the sport of football. Maybe you hated it. That's fine. You do not have to appreciate my perspective, but maybe you enjoyed it. Maybe you found this conversation fun. I would love to hear what you think in the comments. Again, all of these videos, I don't want to try to sound objective. I don't want to sound like I am lecturing. I just want to talk about how I see things. And this is how I've seen this season. This Eagles team and everything else about them and about the Chiefs on the other side. And it just gets me going. I'm sorry for not uploading last week after saying that I was going to post weekly videos. But one, I was kind of writing out the outline for this video. And two, I just gave myself a little break because I've been making football content on TikTok all football season. Speaking of TikTok, if you don't know me over there, you can find me over there. I'll flash it up in a second. You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky as well. And if you like this video or have any feedback, I would love if you would leave it somewhere. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I will actually be back next week this time.